Okay, welcome to everybody to the Truth About Dyslexia podcast. In today's episode, I have the amazing Dr. Jillian Lampert. Hopefully, I've pronounced the name correctly. Every guest I get on does not have a John Smith name. There's some sort of fun and excitement for me to make sure I pronounce correctly. And Dr. Jillian, I'm gonna, we're talking today about eating disorders, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, neurodivergent thinkers, and how this can challenge people. And I thought instead of me introducing yourself, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your story.
Absolutely. I would love to. I'm so happy to be here. So I've worked as a clinician and executive leader in eating disorders for about 30 years. I am a dietitian by training, so I spend a lot of time thinking about nutrition as it relates to all sorts of mental health things, but particularly eating disorders. One of my favorite things I've gotten to do is a lot of education. I talk to a lot of people about eating disorders. I joke when people say, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Well, I talk. That's what I do. I talk about eating disorders to anybody who will listen." But when I started my career as a dietitian, the field of eating disorders was so young. It was so new. So I had an eating disorder in high school and college for 7 years and thankfully recovered fully from that eating disorder, which was difficult, particularly at a time when there was just not that much education, not that much awareness. Nobody knew what to do with me. People said all sorts of unhelpful things. And I was able, through the sort of piecing together some different elements of support, to be able to recover, which was fantastic. But I actually didn't plan on going into the field of eating disorders because there was barely a field at that point. I ended up entirely falling into it. Is my first job as a dietitian. My first boss said, "What do you know about eating disorders?" And I said, "Well, I just trained at this hospital in a large healthcare setting, at a university setting, in one of the only eating disorder programs in the States at the time. So I have this, 11 months of training." And she was like, "Great. You are the most experienced person in the whole building. Go upstairs and meet with these people on this mental health unit, and you all start an eating disorder program." And I thought, I am 25 years old. I'm not the most experienced in anything in this building. But there I was. And so I went upstairs, talked to these people, and we did just that. We started an eating disorder program. And that sort of led me to a career where I've gotten to do so many different things in the field of eating disorders. But most of all, it's bring more awareness and more care to more people so that people don't have to feel alone and like nobody understands them like I felt.
I love that. And it's so true, isn't it? Like I found it in the field of adult dyslexia. The fields just didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. Like it just was a surprise. Like over in New Zealand, when it comes to dyslexia, they only recognized it in 2007, in schools. And in some parts of America, it was 2019 that they actually legitimized it. And so I definitely hear what you're saying about eating disorders. The reason I was so keen to have you on the show is, a little bit about my story. I definitely used food for many years as a dopamine tool to actually just excite myself, highly processed foods to literally become that kind of challenge. And I guess what I was going to ask you is when it comes to eating disorders, there's two sides, isn't there? There's not eating enough, and then there's eating too much. Does that sound right?
It does. And some people struggle with both sides, right? So sometimes people struggle with not eating enough, and that's their primary struggle. Sometimes people struggle with overeating, and that's their primary struggle. And some people have a mixture of both, which is a sort of third, a different kind of struggle. So it really can vary, and it can change over time, which can be really confusing to people. Like it used to feel this way, but now it feels this way. But I think to your comments, the big piece that's informed eating disorder care in the last 10 years or so is really our understanding of the neurobiology, like what's happening in the brain to our dopamine, to our GABA systems. Like, why is food really interesting to some people? And why to some people is it not that interesting? Turns out that as human beings, some of us are really interested by food and some of us aren't. And that can change based on a bunch of other stuff in our experience. And so I think that's really helped people to feel less shame about why can I not just do the stuff that other people, quote unquote, can do around food that I can't do. I can't get myself to eat or stop eating. Why do I feel this way around food when other people seem not to feel that way? And so they end up, again, feeling really alone. Like they're the only person who must feel that.
Interesting. And you mentioned the neuro side of things. What kind of got you interested in the world of things like ADHD and neurodivergent thinkers and eating disorders? What's kind of stood out and what's kind of interested you, I guess?
I think one of the things clinically, as a dietitian who's worked with so many people with eating disorders, we often, as part of regular practice, ask people, like, what are the foods that you are, most uncomfortable with? Or you get to, in most eating disorder settings, you get to choose to have a couple foods that are just foods you're not going to have for now. And so when I was working with clients over the years, there were sort of two categories of kinds of approaches to that. The first category was people who were like, I just am really worried about what these foods are going to do to my body if I eat them. I'm worried I'll gain weight. I'm worried I'll eat them and be fat immediately, whatever their thought was. So they were foods that they were afraid of because of a change in body weight or shape. And then there was another category of folks or of experience with food was, I don't want these foods because I don't like the experience of eating them. I don't like the texture of them. I don't like the taste is overwhelming. I don't like how I feel when I'm eating them. I just feel afraid or really uncomfortable when I physically eat them. It's not the like what they'll do to me down the road. It's the what's happening in my body right at that moment. And so those two categories kind of always existed, but we didn't really understand the second one very well. The first one made sense in sort of historical eating disorder training. We're like, yeah, people are worried about the consequences of eating and their body weight or shape. That's all in the diagnostic criteria. But then there was this group of folks who were really concerned about the experience of it, and it felt terrible to be eating it in the moment. And that's always been really interesting. And so as the neurobiology and genetics work and eating disorders evolved, it helped us to understand that there's certainly some genetic predispositions, sort of predispositions and risk that some of us have. That's probably why only about 9% of the population gets an eating disorder and the other, 90% or so doesn't. There's something about our genetics that put us at heightened risk to develop an eating disorder. But when you look at other related things, when we say like, gosh, people with eating disorders often have ADHD, or they often we have this overlap between autism and eating disorders. Why is that? Turns out it's those parts in the brain that are where the overlap is. And it's usually in that area of difficulty with the experience of eating where that overlap is. So that's super interesting to me.
That is so interesting. And, you're hearing more and more people come out with issues around the gut and ADHD and how everything interconnects and how everything talks. Something I did, reading a bit about your bio, what I really liked to see was that side of that struggle with eating, because this is what we see a lot with ADHD is cause and effect. A lot of people with ADHD have very poor circuits in seeing what cause what effect, because I see it in autism as well, and this challenge in eating can really impact that. And we've all seen kids that will only eat chicken nuggets till they're about 15. Is that something you see as a eating disorder or something as a red flag, or is there anything?
Absolutely. So we used to sort of see that as kind of picky eating, and some kids were pickier eaters than other kids. But then there's a group of kids who have more sort of extreme picky eating. And I often like to tell people, like, eating disorder behaviors are not something that people with eating disorders invented in a vacuum that nobody else knows about, right? Eating disorders are when people have behaviors around eating that are more at the extreme edges, but lots of people are picky with their eating. Lots of people go on a diet and find themselves, after they've restricted food for a couple of days, overeating and feeling really out of control. Lots of people get the idea that maybe if I eat this, I could make up for it by purging or over-exercising, or maybe if I took laxatives, whatever it is. A lot of people have those ideas around our food and weight and bodies partially because we get fed so many of those messages, right, from all of our environmental exposures. But for some people, it's really that sort of extreme version. And so there are kids and adults, because those kids grow up to be adults, that have a really hard time eating any variety of foods. And so we see that in kids becomes kind of a problem when they're not growing adequately because they're only eating the same chicken nuggets and maybe 3 other foods. So they start to have some nutrient deficiencies. They start to have a slowing down in their growth, which that's not supposed to happen in childhood. And so we wonder, like, well, what's going on? And when you dig into it, it's that they like literally can't eat more than just these 4 or 5 really sort of safe foods. And those kids are entering a school system. They're around other kids. They're going to birthday parties. It's really the social exposure that uncovers the fact that they can't do more with their food. And the same thing happens when we see kids go off to university or they leave home for the first time as young adults. They sort of had this safe way of eating at home that now is really difficult to replicate in this new setting. And so that extreme picky eating has an eating disorder diagnostic name called ARFID, and it stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. And we see a huge crossover between ARFID and autism, particularly because of the sensory issues around food, that kids are eating only those 4 foods because they feel sort of comfortable in their bodies eating those 4 foods. And if they eat anything else, it feels really uncomfortable and dysregulating in their body. So why would they eat them? Like, people do things that feel good, and we try not to do things that don't feel good. That's kind of how the brain works.
That's interesting. And so a good question to be someone who you see as a picky eater is to say, why are you a picky eater? What's the kind of like, is it a like, if we say, is it a taste and sensory thing, or is it, what's the reasoning? Because like, I even joke with my wife, there's about 10, 15, 20 things she won't eat. And it's all from her childhood that she had this negative connection with it. And it's kind of visceral when I talk to her about it. It's like a visceral reaction where you can kind of see her either tasting it in her mind and it tasting terrible. And again, I do question that. I see that with my stepdaughter sometimes. Luckily she's worked out that salmon sushi and eggs are things she likes. So we're very lucky that those are 2 relatively nutritious things. But again, this is great to hear. And so, I guess many listeners will be listening and they grew up thinking about their challenges being more about willpower. What do you wish more clinicians and families understood about that?
Yeah, I wish they understood that it's not about willpower. It's about the way that the brain is working. Eating disorders are a condition, an illness, whatever word makes sense for each person's sort of understanding of it. But they're not just a behavior problem gone wrong, or somebody not trying hard enough, or somebody not having enough willpower not to eat the thing or to get themselves to eat the thing. That we see in the brain when you do those fancy functional MRI studies, they can show in the brain that the brains of people with eating disorders just aren't working in the same way as somebody who doesn't have an eating disorder. So for some people, that like desire, the pull of particular foods is very strong. And for other people, the desire to eat is not very strong. And you can see that in the way that the brain works. And so when people come in and they say, I've been struggling with overeating for the last 20 years, and I keep trying different diets and different weight loss plans because I've gained weight over the years with this overeating. I keep trying to change the way I eat, and I just can't do it. I just don't have the willpower. To reframe it to like, wow, your brain is probably a brain that really is excited by the idea of eating. And for some people, the idea of eating is even more exciting than the actual eating of it. So the idea of eating, the anticipation, that's your dopamine system. Your dopamine system's like, oh boy, it's going to happen. This is going to be great, right? And then when you get to eat the food, it's still partially your dopamine system, but then your GABA system kicks in and says, did I like that? Was that yummy? Did that meet my expectations? And if you have a really just maybe a genetically heightened response to wanting something and you get it, even if your response to getting it is normal, you'll have a mismatch between your wanting, which is a little higher up on the mountain, than your liking, which is a little lower on the mountain. So you're left with this but now it feels different than I expected. And when something feels different than we expect as humans, we sort of default to trying it again. We're like, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe I didn't do it right. Maybe I'll just try again. And so people find themselves in this, I'm just going to try to keep eating this thing. Maybe I need more. Maybe if 1 isn't enough, maybe 20 is going to get me what I want. And it really helps to understand you have a brain that probably just really likes to think about it. And when it gets something, it might be less satisfied than you want. How are we going to deal with that? That's not willpower. That's just brain science.
Jillian, are you living in my house? Are you watching me? I'm just trying to I kind of go back and forth from fasting and trying things like keto all the way to Uber Eats, and literally the thought of having this highly processed, stimulating food, and then I got this desire to order more than I need, and then when I get it there, again, you did right. It's the anticipation, the smell, maybe the first 5 bites, and then the rest is just muscle memory and overeating calories. And again, after it, I'm like, why did I do that? I feel terrible for this decision, but it's kind of like using it as a dopamine kicker. Do you see that a lot in people with ADHD?
We do. Absolutely. If we see that, and we also see the sort of, I don't know, maybe other side of the pendulum where people with ADHD, just forget to eat, or they just don't think about it. They're really focused on something else. Something else is more interesting. And so they get to the end of a pretty long period of time. And they're like, yeah, wow, I guess I am hungry. I really should probably eat something. And our brains are sort of primed in that situation to eat quicker, to, eat more rapidly than we usually would, to probably eat more than we usually would because we are hungry. We might not have heard the signal as loudly as we need to, but it's still like the brain and the gut and everybody else is still working in our bodies saying, I need some fuel. And so when we get presented by fuel, we dive right in. Exactly. You get that Uber Eats, you dive right in, you start eating it and you eat it faster. And then you're like, oh, wow, okay, no, I don't feel so good. So we see that a lot.
And is there, from your experience, do you see much around brain and body connection? Because that's what you just said there makes complete sense. Is me understanding the signals of my body, the connection between my brain and my body signals sometimes just does not seem like it exists.
Right.
And it can, and exactly as you say, like I kind of call it the bell curve. When you've got ADHD, you're either at this 10% of the bell curve or this 10%, and you can be on both sides in the same hour. It literally swings that much. I really struggle with that brain and body connection. Is that something you've seen a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in mental health and it certainly as I think back on my, I've been at the Emily program for almost 20 years now. And what's one of the things that's changed the most in 20 years is that the whole world has realized that our brains and our bodies live in the same being and are not like two completely separate, disconnected things. That I love what the science in sort of the gut health and what's happening in our gut, impacting what happens in our brain. All of that is teaching us. But I think you're absolutely right. For some people, I love that image of being sort of on both sides of the bell curve at the same time or within the same narrow time frame. You just don't get to rest in the middle. You swing back and forth between either end. That I think it's a learning of how to hear the signals. For a lot of people, the signals are there, but they're really quiet. And so they might not be the signals you expect. Like if you expect to feel satisfied with what you're eating, you expect to feel like, oh, this is so good. This is great. I just feel so soothed and calmed and happy and peaceful when I'm eating this. If you don't feel that, then you're going to keep eating to try to find it, when actually what your body says when it's feeling more satisfied, it feels less interested. That's maybe what it feels like. Instead of super calm and soothed, it just feels less interested. So for me, it's like a volume knob. Like how can you tune in to hear your particular body's volume? Because it's probably different than what you expect or different than when you're looking for. So if you look for something else, you're much more likely to find it if you're looking for the right thing, right?
That's so interesting. And I 100% get that. It really is a volume knob. And it is, I think it's the reason you sometimes overeat or binge food is because at the end of that, you actually do feel full. You get to a point where your body is actually going, hey, here's a signal. Here's the volume knob. We're going to turn it up a lot louder for you because it's the only time you hear it. It's kind of like deaf to food signals, right? Do you find like there are certain foods or eating patterns that you see ADHD brains gravitate toward, and why? Kind of.
I think so I sort of see it in two ways. I think that when it feels less comfortable for people, the patterns are more like of going a long time without eating and then having these periods of what feels more like impulsivity or out of control or sort of unable to know what to do next. That's the sort of the pattern that a lot of times people come into the clinic with. Like if I'm sitting in my office and seeing somebody as a dietitian, that's the story they're kind of telling me. Like I go this long time without eating. It's really hard for me to plan and to figure out what I want. And then I get food in front of me and I just feel totally out of control and I eat all of it. And to your point, I get to this point where I feel so full. I'm like, okay, I must be done. I must have to stop. And when it feels more imbalanced, it's when people have a structure that allows them to however works for them, to have a structure that regularly fuels their body so that their body can be more sort of at rest with the concept of having to tell itself to eat. It's like, yep, I'm going to get this. I know what's happening. It's predictable. And so the person doesn't have to constantly attune to it to like try to hear a quiet signal. Just like, yep, I'm just putting gasoline in my car and then it'll work. Because if I don't put gasoline in my car, it doesn't work. So I'm just going to keep doing this. And when I do that kind of plan that somebody has helped me put that external structure into place, I like things work better. And I so often hear people talk about that. Like, I can't even describe to you why it works better. It just does. I'm like, yeah, because your brain is not like constantly trying to figure out how to get you fuel, but not have that responded to. So I think the dysregulation is the hallmark of it.
Yeah, it's that emotional dysregulation. And I also think, and it's kind of, that's the challenge with ADHD. And again, it's back to that bell curve. There's a part of us that thrives on routine because again, without it, what would we do? It's the reason I wear black t-shirts every day. I don't have to think about what color the t-shirt I'm wearing is. for that exact reason. It relaxes. And then you get the other side of the ADHD brain that says, I need something that's interesting and new and fresh. And so, it's kind of like routine. It's kind of like duck, 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 goose is kind of the way my eating habits go. It's like I can be an angel until about 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And then the devil comes out and he lives his best life through my body. And then I start it all again the next day, like the other day didn't even happen. Like, this makes sense at all?
Exactly. Yep. No, I think we see that all the time. That whole how can you make that work so that you get to be somewhere in between the angel and the devil and feel like, yeah, this is where I want to be. That I feel like the things that have been most helpful clinically in my work with people and what the data would tell us is having the default be really easy, right? Like if you have visions of having like, I'm going to have really healthy foods and I'm going to have vegetables and I'm going to have fiber and I'm going to have more protein. Well, that's all good and well, unless you actually don't have those things in your house, or if when you decide you're going to have them, you have to go through an elaborate meal preparation process just to be able to achieve some of those. So how can we help set ourselves, like, how can I right now in current self help my future self to do what I want? And so that's where I work a lot with people on, okay, maybe there's one day a week where you have a cooking day, right? Where you make all the things and you put them in individual serving bowls in your fridge. And then when you're at that 3 o'clock, you're like, I need a snack. Well, I can open my fridge and instead of having to shop through the refrigerator, I can just grab the thing that will be what my past self decided my future self will need. That can be really helpful.
Yeah, I do like my past self. My future self or present self definitely has its moments. And I definitely hear that. Like last night, for example, I cooked chicken, asparagus, and sweet potato kumara over here. And again, like there's 3 different cooking times, 3 different areas. And, you sometimes feel so stupid when you're going, this seems challenging. But for my brain to manage all of those different heat sources, the heat amounts at different times, getting them out at the right time, there are definitely like yesterday I had some energy, but other days where my brain's just like, good luck, you're not doing that. And you're missing one ingredient and you're like, oh, what's the point? And it's like the minute I have to shop in the moment, poor decisions are awaiting me.
Absolutely.
Do you see a lot of what are the kind of red flags when you're talking to people with neurodivergent brains? What are the red flags that they can look out for that you see that could be leading them to say, hey, this is not just something that's normal. This is a red flag.
Yeah, I think it's exactly some of those things that most of the time they feel like they're super impulsive with what they eat. And then they get in the cycle of feeling bad. Like, I wanted to do this. I couldn't do it. I feel bad. It must be my fault. That's a red flag. Like, it's not your fault. It's just how it is. We got strategies that we can put into place that'll help you to sort of be the person you want to be. So that sense of like, this must be my fault, which turns into a shame spiral, which goes nowhere good for anybody, right? So that experience, I think, is a big red flag. Another experience is you always feeling dissatisfied with your body, whether it's always wanting to lose weight, always wanting to improve your health, always being so drawn to the latest fads because there must be something else out there that can make your body or yourself better through nutrition. That relentless sort of desire for it to be better can be a big red flag. And then I think too, how does your eating show up socially? Like, can you go out? If your friends say like, oh, we're going to go out and we're going to get together and have this thing, is your first thought, well, that sounds fun? Or is your first thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to eat? Can I do that? Do I have to check the menu? I can't go because they're going to see how I eat. I don't like, what am I going to wear? Like if your brain immediately goes into all of the reasons that is not going to be very smooth, that's a red flag, because you hope that your brain would be like, okay, sounds fun. What do I got to do to get ready for that? So I think those are some red flags that people like. The tricky part is that so much of our culture is filled with that, right? If you look on your social media, there's like 10 ways to be healthier and 10 new foods that are going to be the superfoods. There's all kinds of sources that will tell us we could be doing better. But if you're feeling like you're always not doing well, you're always not doing good enough with your eating, with your food, with your body, that's one of the biggest red flags there is.
Yeah, then I definitely hear that. And I see that in myself, definitely. And it's not even though like I'm quite creative in the fact that I can always find something on a menu to eat, I don't always trust future Stephen to make that decision when I'm in the moment. Future Stephen's there. And, again, you see this with ADHD, autism especially, is that if you're in a in an unroutine situation and you're in a loud environment, say your sensitivities are firing, your brain goes, can I have something, I want to eat something that relaxes me, or something that gives me that dopamine hit, or gives me the energy. And so poor decisions get made. I see this has happened over the years. And unless I'm in a beautiful routine, like you've mentioned, or a program that actually fits my brain and doesn't impact it, it's painful, right? And so talking about some of the stuff you do with tailoring kind of like these recovery plans for how a person's brain is wired, do you look at things like focus, impulse control? Like, how does it kind of work from that point of view, out of interest?
Yeah, it really depends on exactly what you're saying. Like, how does somebody see the world when it's not going well? Like, how does that work when it's not going well? So I'll have somebody explain that day to me when it doesn't go well. Now explain a day where you imagine or it did go well. And we talk about what the difference is, because for different people, what the difference is varies, right? Over the years, I've sort of curated this list of like, what are the most common things that show up? Okay, one of the most common things is when people feel they have support or they can reach out for help. That is one of the differences between a day that doesn't go well and a day that goes well. Right? So somebody else knowing that you're having this experience, and so you can say to somebody across the restaurant table, oh, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, don't know what to order, that person can say like, oh, well, I remember you telling me in these situations, it's helpful if you pick from 3 things instead of the whole menu. Could you try that? That really letting somebody else in can be so crucial. So letting somebody else in. The second one is having, for a lot of people, it's like, what are your islands of safety you can swim to? When you're in a situation, having it past you is planned what 3 islands of safety are, that you can default to that. Because again, the default, like, how can we make the default helpful? What might be there for you that you're like, oh, in these situations, I know if I do this, this, and this, that'll help. It might not feel as good as I want it to. And that's okay. I can figure that out. So really like acknowledging that even those islands of safety, those ways that you're going to eat aren't going to magically make it all better, because food is energy, fuel, enjoyment, connection, and it doesn't have all the answers. And so when we're seeking all of our answers in food, we're definitely going to get ourselves into trouble. So how can we find other things that will help us to be the self we want to be? And then I think that the other pieces that we talk to everybody about that struggles with their relationship with food are the things that we talk about in a lot of other ways, right? How's your sleep? Like if somebody comes in to talk to me, I'm super curious about their sleep, because if you're not getting enough sleep, it's going to impact your appetite. It's going to impact your appetite. It's going to impact your ability to make the decisions you want around food. So how's your sleep? How's your coping? Because if you don't have strong coping skills that don't have to do with food, like you're going to get in trouble with food. What are your coping skills? And then the third is moving. How are you moving your body? Are you able to move your body in ways that you enjoy? Because moving our bodies, we know, like helps our brain to work better. It helps our brain to sort of get unstuck in the routines and endless loops it gets stuck in. Moving can actually help get us out of that loop. So how are you moving your body? And then I want to know what you're eating. But I actually want to know how you're sleeping, coping, and moving first, because all of those things are going to have a direct impact on your eating.
Interesting. And did you find I definitely hear what you're saying here, because I'm a huge advocate for sleep and exercise and all those things over the years I've kind of fallen into as great tools. I guess like what I've learned over the years is that when it comes to stuff like processed food, it's no longer really a food, right? Especially around ADHD, it's a drug. It's literally giving you such a high sugar calorie fix that it is signaling to your brain, here's something that's going to soothe you. Do you ever find, like, you can put in the recovery plans, but are there any specific ways you found that really support somebody when they know that they're falling into that kind of food as a drug kind of situation? And would you say to them, get up, go for a walk, don't overthink about it? Like, is there certain things like that come to mind?
Yeah. So I often will say to people, like, we have this all foods fit philosophy. Like, food is just food. All foods could fit into a healthy eating plan. And not all foods fit for every person. And so it's okay to have foods that through experience, you're the best expert in through experience, having those foods around generally doesn't go well. And so maybe if you have the option, let's not have them around. Or maybe you have them with other people so that you have that support and you have that structure built in. So that's one of the first things. Like, not all foods have to fit for everybody. If there's foods that don't work for you, don't eat them. There are plenty of foods out there. And I know it's easy for me to say don't eat them, but it's okay to have foods that are just foods that don't work for you. And that's what I tell people. That's the important part. It's not, you're not buying that food because it's bad for you or it's overly processed or it's unhealthy. You're not buying it. You're choosing not to eat it because it doesn't work for you. That's okay. We all have things that don't work for us.
I really like that distinction. And I think that's the thing. It's those little aha moments. It's going, hey, this, and I think like many of us, we can kind of get into this dopamine kind of rule of trying to add new health diets or fads. And I don't think there's ever been a time where there have been more fads in the world between supplements, between diet types. There are variations of variations of variations. And it's more about, okay, does this food work for you? You know, if I get put in front of a bowl of chips, I'm going to eat that whole bowl of chips or a block of chocolate. If it's dark chocolate, I can eat it and stop. If it's milk chocolate, it's a drug. And it's kind of like, I think that's the thing I've been learning is allowing myself to see it as a drug and see it as it's not food. This is actually a drug that's in the shape of food. Like, do you find are there certain foods that trigger more people than others, or is everybody just so unique, I guess?
I think everybody's a little bit unique, but I think people are definitely triggered more by those highly processed foods that are the amazingly engineered combination of sugar and salt and fat and texture. So if you think about a chip, for example, like there's a lot going on, right? There's a little salty, there's a little savory, there's a little tiny bit of sweet, there's the texture, there's the like freshness, there's the aroma, there's all these things. And so those foods are multi-sensory stimulation. And so no wonder that if you're really sensitive to stimulation and your brain likes that and gets a dopamine hit from it, you're like, woohoo, this is great. And then you eat them quickly and more than you want. And then you get to the point where you feel terrible just because your physical experience is that it doesn't feel good. So for everybody, that can be a different food, but it tends to be those foods that are really more combination experiences. A lot of people talk about sugar as like, I'm avoiding sugar. I think it's not so much like that's kind of a shorthand, but it's not so much that those folks are at home on the floor with a bag of sugar and a spoon. Not to say that that's never happened for anybody, but that doesn't happen nearly as much as that person being on the floor with a pan of brownies, right? That like combination of the sugar and the salt and the fat, like that's our brain's survival mechanism. Like that thing is going to help me to survive. And so that's where I feel like people identifying for themselves, like some people like sweets more than salty or savory things, just knowing your own self and then figuring out a plan around those foods. Because for somebody who can't eat brownies with peace, they can eat chips and they're fine, like a couple and they're fine and they move on. It has no power over them. But the brownies, they sit on the counter all day and plan to get me when I get home. That's how people will explain it. So maybe brownies aren't for you. Or maybe when there are brownies, we figure out a way for you to have those in a different way. So I think for people, it's different, but it tends to be those really multi-sensory foods that present a change.
Yeah, that's great as well. Very well said. Like it's kind of, I gave up drinking alcohol at the beginning of this year. And I can literally have beer in my fridge downstairs in our garage, and I don't touch it. But you put a can of Coke in there, that's sugar, caffeine, and all the good stuff together, and I've had a hard day. My gosh, I'm going to drink that. Like so, and it's just such an interesting mixture, right? How the brain can connect with an individual item for me, where the other thing probably has a very similar calorie log, but it just doesn't interest me. That's crazy. And so for people listening today, if they are really relating to this, what's the first thing you would tell them to do? If they're starting to notice they've got an eating disorder, what's the first thing they could start to change?
I think the first thing they should do if they have it accessible to them is reach out for help, right? That's always the first. If you think you might have an eating disorder, tell somebody. Eating disorders have the second highest mortality of any mental health condition. So these are not illnesses that will just go away on their own, that are meaningless, that are mild. These are illnesses that can kill people. So I always tell people, like, get help, whatever that looks like, whether it's your GP or a therapist or a dietitian or a group or an online or a self-help or a support group, get something. There's a really great online, worldwide accessible support groups through the National Alliance for Eating Disorders. You can join a support group and just listen, like just reach out for some sort of help is the first thing to do. The second step is to acknowledge, like, okay, this might be a thing. And just like every other challenge in my life, I'm probably not going to fix this all overnight. right? Probably not just one and done. I'm going to need to think about this and get support in doing that. And so if somebody comes into my office, that's the first thing we do. Like, okay, when does it get hard? Tell me about what happens. Just like you've given those explanations about like the Coke or the chips, like, okay, those seem like foods that are tricky. Let's dive into like, how does that go? Where does that come from? What do you think you're getting out of that? So being able to have that conversation with yourself or with somebody else often reveals things like, I wasn't supposed to have soda growing up. So when I had it, it was a treat. And I just really like found that to be super enticing, not just because of the can of Coke itself, but because of everything it meant. That usually the foods that have a lot of power have a lot of sort of overcoupling with emotions, with messages we have in our lives. And certainly the media does its part to tell us that Coke will make you happy and chips are a thing you can drown your ice cream's a thing you can drown your sorrows in. Chips are a thing that'll make you happy. Like we have these messages that come to us through all kinds of media exposure. No wonder we tend to gravitate in those ways. So really taking a bit of stock individually of like, what's hard for me? And once I have those 3, 4, 10, 20 foods that are hard for me, let's not start eating them all at once. Let's not throw them all away all at once. Let's take it step by step and then ask about how are those foods showing up for me. Turns out when I don't get enough sleep and when I've had a bad day at work and when I'm tired and I'm overly hungry and distracted and just feeling uncomfortable in my skin, well, those are the days that I have all of the hard times with those foods. Makes sense. So what else can we do about that? So it's really got to be a step-by-step process. It doesn't get better overnight, but it didn't happen overnight either. It just takes that time and that support from other people. A lot of times people are like, no, I got this. I'm going to fix it all on my own. Like if you had a broken leg and you were laying in the middle of the sidewalk and somebody walked by and offered to help you, you probably wouldn't say, no, I got it. I'm going to fix my broken leg. Why do we think we do that with our minds?
I'm not sure you've met enough ADHD people because a lot of dyslexics would probably think I can do this myself. And, and that this is the problem. And I 100% agree. Like I'm a shocker myself at asking for help enough. And again, it's kind of this thing I think we see a lot in neurodivergent thinkers is for so many years, they've seen themselves as problem solvers. If they can't solve their own problems, then what else do they have left? And, that's a real feeling I see a lot out there. There's also that challenge with overthinking things to death. Many of us, and I see this with a gene called the COMT gene. A lot of neurodivergent thinkers have an AA allele or one of the alleles changed. And what it means is dopamine doesn't clear from your brain quick enough. And so what's happening is those people are overthinking this stuff to an extreme extent, and there's no way to get out of their own heads. And so they keep trying the same things again and again and again, getting the wrong results. And half the battle is just talking to somebody who gets it, who can ask the deeper questions, right?
Yep, absolutely. I think it's just so well said because you're right. I do love when people say, I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to need you to have those skills. Like that is a critical skill in recovery is being able to problem solve. And exactly what you said, if you have that experience of talking about it with somebody else, then somebody else can take you off the hook of where you're stuck and help you to see like, yep, you just keep doing that. That makes sense. You keep doing that. And it's also not going to work. So what else can we do? How else can we find another way? Use your problem solving skills to be able to do that. It's a delight when people have that perspective in life about having problem solving skills because you're going to need them. And you need other people to help regulate that, to help sort of think of new ways to aim that. It's like a superpower. But how do I help you focus it over here instead of where it's getting stuck bouncing off the wall?
Of that. As we get close to the end, what's one thing that I haven't asked you about that you feel really strongly that the audience would get something from to hear that I haven't asked the question? Is there anything that my awesome neurodivergent audience needs to hear?
I think I always encourage people to think about where do we hear all this stuff that impacts us? And particularly in a neurodivergent audience, hear it loudly. Like people will hear the message and they'll internalize it. Like, where do we hear it? And how can we be just a little seed of change in the world? Like, here's an example. If you're learning how to ride a bike as a kid and you fall off the bike and you skin your knee, some well-meaning adult almost always brings that kid some food, which is really interesting, isn't it? Like, unless that adult brings me a popsicle to put on my knee to help the swelling go down and the pain go away, that food is entirely unhelpful in helping my knee feel better. But what we're learning and we're teaching that kid is that I'm going to distract you with this food. I'm going to distract your feeling with this food. And so I think there's a really good way of asking, or an opportunity to ask ourselves, like, where am I distracting myself with something that doesn't fit? Food and a bleeding knee doesn't quite fit. That's not the right solution to that problem. So how can I think about that for me, but also how can I think about that for the outside world? Because I can make a little difference. The next time I'm around a kid who falls, I can not get food. And instead I can say, hey, how you feeling? Or let's go get you some ice for that knee, or let's get back on the bike. It'll be okay. Like, where are we introducing food in a way that really doesn't help our dopamine sensitive situation? So I think a lot about sort of prevention and the world as I think about, how each person can help themselves or be helped with other people.
Yeah, it's so well said. And it's, I think for everybody, it's that connection. Like I think back to when I was young, I was, it's a terrible joke, but I used to be like a little African kid. I was so skinny. I was so skinny until I was about 6 years old. And then my dad got a job in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East, completely out of my comfort zone. I was a kid being taken away from everything I knew. And my father used food 100% as a coping mechanism because he was in a weird foreign land, again, neurodivergent as well. And, he would, he'd eat and eat and eat literally because it was his safety zone. And when you're in the Middle East, you don't get to drink because they don't drink alcohol. So food became the thing. And it became like a battle to see who could eat the most, who could eat sugar, donuts, all the American stuff that, the Middle East is probably actually worse than parts of America and some of it now because of the amount of sugar and stuff. And so that's where I learned it. And that's where I built these triggers and these connections of safety. And so, it's a great point for anybody to think back to, where are these triggers that you're creating for others? And where were they created in your life? Because if you can't get over them, there's no hope.
Right. And it's a beautiful way to accept, like, yep, that totally makes sense that your dad would do that. It would totally make sense that you would hear those messages, and you can change them. You can understand them, welcome them in, sit them down, give them a cup of tea, talk to them, and then be able to help move on from them. Understanding is really important. And then seeing like, oh, how could I do just like one little thing different so that I can put out into the world something I wish I would have had different for me. So I think it's a lovely way to think about it.
I love that, Jillian. And so how can people find out more about you and what you do? And it's like, have you written a book yet, or is it on the list, where we're sitting? Did you keep getting asked about that?
No, I just think I'm going to write a book one day, and I just can't quite settle on what it's going to be about. So it hasn't started yet. So I keep thinking about it, but I do a lot of writing on the Emily Program blog. So if you go to emilyprogram.com, a lot of blog content there. We have a ton of good stuff on social media. We have a podcast called Piecemeal that's really about finding peace with food that I'm the host of. So those are some really great places to find more information.
Oh, fantastic. We'll pop all the links to those in the show notes because, again, I think there's a lot of the audience out there that are dealing with these challenges. I know I've dealt with these challenges. I'll be listening, going to listen to your podcast because I think, if you can, it's great what you're doing and talking to people, especially in the neurodivergent community, because so many of us just think there's something wrong with us in general, whereas these things can be solved. You can do the right work. I think what I always remind people is sadly, you're not special. Others have been here. This is the problem. Like a lot of our parents said, oh, you're special. You're not special. There are solutions to your problems and you don't have to solve them all yourself. Go listen to Jillian's amazing podcast and get the advice you need, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time. And for all the listeners out there, I've been Stephen, this has been Jillian Lampert, and I'll be back next week. See ya.